All right, folks, welcome to the second video in our basic math chapter, and this one will be on fractions. So first thing we want to talk about with fractions, identifying the parts of a fraction. So we have numerators and we have denominators. And the way I like to remember which is the denominator is the number we divide by. So in the example here, I've got one, of course I have a pen ready, 1/2. Our denominator is on the bottom and our numerator is on the top. And how I remember that is that if I was to turn this into a decimal, I'm going to go 1 divided by 2. So my dividing number is my denominator. So, which of these fractions on your screen are less than 1? Well, first off, we can see 4/9 is less than 1. 3/4 is less than 1. And 21/22 are less than 1. And why are they less than 1? Because if we take 4 divided by 9, we're going to get 0 point something. If we take 3 divided by 4, we're going to get 0 point something. And if we take 21 divided by 22, we're going to get 0 point something, right? So, now, which numbers are greater than 1? So, we have 4/9. We've already said that that's less than 1. 7/7, is that greater than 1? No. But 18 out of 12, that's going to be more than 1, right? Because if we take 18 and divide by 12, we're going to get 1 point something, right? So next question is which ones are equal to 1? Well, that's the 7 out of 7, right? Any number divided by itself equals 1. 7 divided by 7 is going to give us 1, right? And just because our fractions are right on top of each other, if they're written beside, sort of on a slide like that, that's just so the computer you can see that on a computer, right? You fit on one line, right? Okay, so next slide, we have mixed numbers. Now this is 2 3/4, right? Now we have 2 3/4. The 2 in this case is a whole number. And then the 3/4 is a fraction, right? So we want to convert mixed numbers into a fraction. How do we do that? We're going to multiply the whole number by the times of the denominator. And then we're going to add the result from the step 1 to the numerator. And then we're going to place the result from step 2 over the original denominator. I'm going to show you an example. So, we have an example here. We've got 4 2/3. And we want to know what is that as a fraction altogether. So if we had 4 wholes, we've got 4 times 3, which equals 12. My pen stopped working for a second there. It's 12, right? So we have 12, and then we had a 2 for our numerator, so we add our 2, so we get 14. And we have 14 out of 3, right? We multiplied our whole number by our denominator, gave us 12. We added in our numerator to get 14, and then we place that result over our denominator, which give us 14/3, right? So what we did was converting a fraction to a mixed number now is we're going to divide the numerator by the denominator, and the result will give us a whole number and a remainder. We'll write the whole number in place of the remainder over the original denominator. So here's an example. Convert 9/4 to a mixed number. The first thing we're going to do is divide the numerator by the denominator. So 9 divided by 4 is going to give us 2 with a remainder of 1, right? So remember the old long division that we used to do in school? So we had 4 here and 9 here. So 4 goes into 9 twice, and it gives us 8. And we subtract, we left with our remainder of 1, right? So what does that mean? That means we've got 2 and something out of our 4, because our 4 was our denominator, when we had a remainder of 1. So we have 2 and 1/4. So converting using a calculator now, we can take our, we'll take our numerator and divide it by our denominator, right? And just by punching it into a calculator. And then we can subtract the whole number and then take the remaining decimal and multiply that by our original denominator. So I'll show you in the next example here. So we have 27 out of 8, right? 27 eighths. So if we want to write this as a mixed number using our calculator, we take 27 and divide by 8, which will give us 3.375. So right off the bat, our whole number here is 3. So I'm going to put that over here, right? Our denominator is still 8. Now we're just trying to figure out what our numerator is here. So once we've taken that 3 away, we're left with 0.375, which we can now multiply times our denominator of 8 to give us, let the slides catch up here, which gives us 3, right? So that's going to be our numerator here. So we end up with 3 3/8. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is multiplying by fractions. So how do we multiply fractions? Well, it's pretty simple. We multiply the numerators together and then we multiply the denominators together. And then we try and reduce down our final answer, right? So here's an example. 3/8 times 4/3 equals what? Well, we take the 3 times the 4 and we get 12. And the 8 times the 3, we get 24, right? That's the pretty simplest, pretty easiest thing of doing fractions is multiplying them. We get 24, so we get 12/24. And yes, we'll get to reduction here in a second. So dividing fractions, on the other hand, we're going to flip our second fraction and then multiply. So we invert our second fraction, flip it upside down, and then we multiply the two fractions. So in our example here, we have 3, my pen working? 3/8 divided by 4/3. So we need to take 3/8 multiplied by 3/4. See how we inverted that 4/3, right? So now we end up with 9 30-seconds. Right? 3 times 3 is 9, and 8 times 4 is 32. So now, like I told you we were going to get to this. Reducing fractions. So we find common denominators. So what is a common denominator? That's a number that's going to divide into both your numerator and your denominator evenly. So you get a whole number, right? Yeah. So now the challenge is finding the number that divides correctly into each one. So that example we had 12/24, right? So right off the bat, some of you are going to notice that, well, 12 will go into 12 because that'll give us 1, right? And then 12 can go into 24, which is going to give us 2. But you might not recognize that right off the bat, right? You might need to say, oh, well, hey, 2 will go into both of them. So if I divide the top, whatever I do to the top, I have to do to the bottom, right? So if I'm going to divide the top by 2, I'm going to get 2, I'm going to get 6, and I'm going to divide the bottom by 2, I'm going to get 12. Oh, okay, well now I recognize that 6 can go into both of these, and guess what? I divide by 6, divide by 6, I'm going to end up with 1/2, right where we started. So it may take a couple more steps for you to recognize the numbers that are divisible by for each the numerator and the denominator, but if you keep continuing down, you will get to the smallest fraction. And of course, we could always do it in the calculator, right? So if we were to take an example here coming up, we've got 4/9 to a decimal. 4/9. We want to go to a decimal. We can punch it into a calculator, and we're going to get 0.444444, and it goes on forever and ever and ever, right? So in the case that we have a repeating number, we're going to round, and let's say we round to 3 decimal places in this one. 1, 2, 3. Is that 4 going up or down? It's not going anywhere because that 4 isn't above a 5, right? So we get 0.444. All right, so converting decimals into fractions now, we do that for practical measurement purposes, right? If we don't, if we can't measure what we've got for a number, we can't convert it, right? We need to be able to convert our fractions into something that matches our measuring tool. And a lot of the times we'll end up using relevant fractions that are 1/8 of a cup, 1/4 of a cup, 1/3 of a cup, 1/2 a cup, right? Now these tie into our imperial measurements, which we'll get into more in later chapters when we start converting units, but they're always based on 16 or 8, right? So those fractions, 16 cups in a gallon or 8 ounces in a cup, are going to allow us, if we have 1/2 a cup, we're going to have 4 ounces, right? So it depends on how we measure in the kitchen. So how do we convert a decimal to a useful kitchen fraction? Well, we multiply the decimal to the right of the decimal point by the 8 or the 16, depending on what we're trying to use to measure. For example, if we're going to cups, we're going to multiply times 8. If we're going to pounds or ounces, from pounds to ounces, or for cups to tablespoons, we're going to multiply times 16. And this will become clearer when we get more into the unit conversion chapter as to which one you choose when. But for the sake of this today, we're just going to look at how do we get to the cups and how do we get to the ounces by looking at whether we're using the 8 or the 16. And then we reduce if necessary, right? So, as an example, we have 0.875 pounds. And we want to get it to a useful measure. So in this case, a useful measure, we're going to be looking for ounces, right? Because we can measure ounces as a whole number easier than we can do 0.875. Depending on how many decimal places our scale goes to, it may be difficult for us to get to 0.875, but I guarantee you every scale you've got is going to measure to a whole ounce, right? So the thing that you're going to memorize eventually, that there are 16 ounces equal to 1 pound. So in this case, we have 0.875 pounds times 16 ounces, and we're going to end up with a total of 14 ounces. And now this is a measurement that we can actually easily measure on our scale, right? So what this really is 14 out of 16, right? 16 ounces in 1 pound. So we end up with 14 ounces. So the next example I've got is converting 0.325 cups to a useful measure. So we've got 0.325, and we want to cut cups, and we want to go to a useful measure. So what would be a useful measure in this instance? How could we measure 0.325 cups? Well, I'm probably like 1/2 a cup, 1/3 of a cup. So we know 1/4 of a cup is going to be like 0.25. What's 1/3 of a cup? 1/3, if we take 1 divided by 3, we end up with 0.333333 repeating. and 0.325 of a cups is pretty darn close, right? So maybe we shouldn't be calculating. Maybe we should be using our noggin and thinking that, boy, 3.325 is very close to 0.33, which is actually 1/3, right? So it would be easily to measure that, right? We could take the 0.325 and multiply times 8 ounces in a cup, but if we take this and multiply times the 8 ounces, we get 2.6 ounces. And I don't know about your measuring cup, but my measuring cup does not have a 2.6 ounce marking on it. So we would round to the third of a cup. So next example I have is convert 0.192 cups to a useful measure. So we've got 0.192 cups, and we want to go to a useful measure. In this case, I would be thinking ounces, right? So like I did before, we're going to multiply times 8 ounces in a cup, and we're going to end up with 1.536 ounces. So I'm pretty sure I can't measure 1.536 ounces, so I'm going to have to round up to 2 ounces, and 2 ounces out of 2 out of 16 is actually 1/4, right? Although it might not be the most accurate, that's the closest thing, right? So again, this is like I talked about at the beginning. Rounding reduces accuracy, right? So 1.5 ounces, we're actually rounding all the way up to 2, and we're getting almost a whole half an ounce more in this recipe, right? But depending on the tools you have in your kitchen, you're probably not going to be able to measure the 0.192 or the 1.536 ounces. Okay, so that's talking about fractions and how we use those in the kitchen. The next video, we're going to talk about percentages, and they're really important. So see you soon.